station, friends, and family to CJA's very first virtual happy hour. We're so glad that you're all joining us tonight, and we know that more of you will be joining as the night goes on. These days, there's like really no after hours. I think we all work 24 hours a day. There are no boundaries. We're in our homes. So a lot of you are finishing up and hopping on. And so that will be wonderful. And we'll get started. And so first of all, we want to welcome everyone and tell you that my name is Maudlin. I'm Maudlin Ihajirika, and I am a columnist and reporter at the Chicago Sun-Times. And I'm also the president of the Chicago Journalists Association. And I will be moderating tonight's panel. So as many of you already know, the Chicago Journalists Association is the oldest nonprofit organization of journalists in Chicago. You also know that this is our 81st year of rewarding journalistic excellence and fostering comradeship among Chicago's journalism community. We're honored that so many of you are members, from the most storied veterans to those who are J-School students, as well as those of you who are recent graduates. And we hear from our members all the time about the increasing difficulty of navigating journalism against the backdrop of COVID-19 and the economic hits to all the legacy media outlets, from television stations like Angels at WTTW to newspapers like Nader's, the Chicago Sun-Times. And of course, the digital arena is doing it best. You know, they're finding out, they're carving that trail for us. So we'll find out how Mina's Black Club Chicago is doing it, as well as how Cicero Independiente is doing it. We'll find that out from Ankur. So our first virtual event earlier this year brought together some of the nation's top experts to help us understand the ever-evolving media landscape. Tonight, however, we want to bring you the positive side of this equation by spending an evening hearing from some of the top millennials making their way in Chicago's vibrant media terrain. For those of you who are joining us from out of state, and indeed, internationally, we had folks from Brazil register at our last one. And we want to tell you that Chicago is very representative of the media landscape across the nation. You've got legacy media, you know, pivoting and trying to figure out what works. And they're facing furloughs, layoffs, downsizing. You've got digital media springing up and filling the gap, and everyone is moving toward a digital sphere and figuring out how to do that monetarily. So today, Chicago Journalists Association is excited to introduce you to Mina Bloom, who is a reporter for Block Club Chicago. Hi, Mina.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
And hold on, and then we have Angel Idowu. No, Angel Ido, I practiced that, sorry, who is the arts correspondent for WTTW-TV's Chicago Tonight Show. Welcome, Angel.
Thank you.
And then we have Nader Issa, who is the education reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times and president, I should add, of the Asian Association of Journalists, Asian American Journalists Association. Welcome, Nader.
Hi, everyone.
And lastly, but not leastly, we have Ankur Singh, who is co-founder of Cicero Independiente in Cicero, Illinois. And welcome, Ankur.
Hey.
So please be advised that this forum is being recorded. It's being simultaneously streamed on CJA's Facebook Live, and it will be available for viewing later on that page. So now we'll get started, and we're going to let each panelist make their own introductions to help you get to know them better. After that, we'll ask them some of the questions that you have sent us for these amazing panelists, and they'll take a couple of minutes to answer each question. And then our discussion will end around 7 p.m. with the last 20 minutes saved for your Q&A. We want this to be an interactive conversation, so please feel free to fire questions at them. They can take it through the Q&A function. Also, share your thoughts and feedback as we move through the evening within the chat box. We want to know what you're thinking. There, you'll also find these guys' bios and their social media handles, should you wish to follow up with any of them afterward. Please enable the all panelists and attendees function so that we can all participate in the chat. All right, let's begin the program. Mina, you're up alphabetically. Please introduce yourself.
All right. Hi, I'm Mina Bloom, and I am a reporter for the news website Block Club Chicago. We cover neighborhoods across the city. You may remember DNA Info. DNA Info was shut down a couple years ago, and out of its ashes came Block Club Chicago. So I cover Logan Square, Avondale, and Humboldt Park for Block Club. And I've been part of the Block Club DNA Info family since 2014. So prior to joining Block Club, I was a reporter at DNA Info, where I also covered Logan Square, Humboldt Park, and Avondale. I live in Logan Square, and that's also part of kind of what we do is we like to have reporters who know and understand the neighborhoods and embedded in the neighborhoods. Yeah, I had a journey at DNA Info where I started as a general assignment reporter there. We used to call them runners. Then I became an Uptown reporter for them. Then I became a Lincoln Park reporter for them. And then I became a Logan Square reporter for them. So it was a long journey to cover the neighborhood that I live in. But I've been, again, a part of the Block Club DNA Info family since 2014, and I really believe in what we do. And before that, before DNA Info, I was freelancing a lot. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I worked at Groupon for a couple of years in merchant services, like different things that weren't related to journalism. So DNA Info really was my first daily reporting job, and I've been with this family for, and I say family because it is a family, for several years now. And again, I think the mission is incredible, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So.
Very cool. Thank you, Mina. Angel, you're next. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angel Idowu. So I'm the arts correspondent for WTTW for our show Chicago Tonight, and our new shows Black Voices and Latino Voices that just started this past weekend. So unlike Mina, I have not been with TTW for nearly as long. I started last year. July last year. So I've been with WTTW for a little bit more than a year now, and I cover just everything in Chicago under the arts umbrella, which is really awesome because I think a lot of people don't realize that art can be anything, anything that is a form of self-expression. So that can be, poetry, writing, of course, traditional art forms of like painting or scrapbooking, or just kind of like those different unique styles. But yeah, so I cover everything in the arts realm in Chicago, and that's been an incredible journey. Before that, I was a general assignment reporter and producer for a CBS affiliate in Jackson, Mississippi. So I did that for about a year and a half before I made the transition to Chicago. And that, I think, just really helped set the foundation for my career as a journalist, because kind of balancing the role of a producer and on-air talent is, they're two completely different jobs. But I think they really go hand in hand in helping you understand how to be better at both of your jobs. And so that was a really great start for me. And like I said, I was there for a year and a half. And then before that, I was, actually, that was my first job. So before that, I was at Northwestern. So I graduated from the Medill program. I went right after undergrad. I graduated from Beloit College in 2016. That's in a really small liberal arts school in Beloit, Wisconsin. And there I studied a lot of, I wasn't sure what kind of journalism I was interested in, so I kind of did a little bit of everything, like fashion journalism. I was interested in politics for a little bit before I realized that just kind of broadcast journalism and the scope that that offers was really what I was interested in, because also, to clarify, in undergrad I was doing more print stuff. So I made the transition to broadcast when I decided to go to Northwestern. So yeah, so I would say I am a young budding journalist. I would say 10 years in the making. I'm from Chicago native. I went to Mother Macaulay, and there I reported for my high school newspaper. I was on the yearbook, and then I was also on the MASH, which was a student-led newspaper at the time, and that was really cool. That was kind of my first experience of really reporting in a big city, right? Yeah, and then I guess I went, from now to backward, but I would say that's my bio.
Very cool. Thank you, Angel. And Nader, your turn. Please introduce yourself.
So, hi everyone, I'm Nader. I report for the Chicago Sun-Times. I cover education. I've been on that beat for a little over a year now. So I got there just in time to cover a teacher's strike and a historic school closing and racial injustice protests. So it's been a interesting first year on the beat. Before that, I've been with the Sun-Times since 2017, so about 3.5 years. Before the education beat, I was a general assignment reporter, so I covered everything from stories that Mina broke, like an alligator sighting in Chicago, to criminal court, violence, all that. And then my first role with the Sun-Times was on the breaking news desk. I worked overnights from midnight to 8 a.m., which is as fun as it sounds. Before that, I was at Loyola University, so went there for 4 years. I'm from the Chicago area. Grew up in the western suburbs in Lombard, and that's me. I started out wanting to go into sports journalism, and so that was sort of what I had my sights set on. It's also what I thought I was going to the Sun-Times for, but then once I got hired, things sort of shifted around a little bit. So I got thrown on the news side, and I've been making a living there. So it's been fun, and that's me.
Thank you, Nader. And last but not least, Ankur, please, you're up.
Hey everyone. So yeah, my name is Ankur. I'm one of the co-founders of Cicero Independiente. Cicero Independiente is a hyperlocal news outlet in Cicero, Illinois, like west suburbs, like on the southwest side. We're pretty young. We're only a little over a year old, so we're a pretty new organization. Unlike I think most of the folks on here, like I've never worked as a professional journalist. I still have a day job. I grew up in Bloomington, Illinois. That's where I went to high school, and then I went to college to a small liberal arts school in Arizona. And at that time, I was studying to become a teacher. And I was also really interested in media literacy, throughout high school, making short films and videos and documentaries and things like that. And so during my studies, I got really interested in media literacy education, teaching students how to create videos and do writing and things like that. And then my senior year of college, I moved to the US-Mexico border, Nogales, Arizona, where I was teaching media literacy to 7th and 8th grade students. And this was during the 2016 presidential election. So they were working on creating videos of what it's like to live on the border during this time. And during that time, I sort of saw there were media, journalists coming in left and right every day to cover the border, but they were talking to and they were talking to the same 3 people. You weren't really getting local perspectives. And so that's where I sort of got interested in local journalism and news. And so I decided to apply to Medill for grad school. So I went there for grad school. And then I came to Cicero. I'm not from Cicero. I came to Cicero because I got a position at a local nonprofit that was it was providing shelter, housing, and case management to asylum seekers. So it was living in the shelter, helping asylum seekers transition to life in the US. And that's what brought me to Cicero. And during my time in grad school, we'd go out report for stories. So I just did a lot of my reporting in Cicero, just because it was easier. I didn't want to take an hour train to Chicago when I could just go down the street to the city council. So during that time, I met a lot of people, really great people in Cicero, a lot of great community organizers who were doing a lot of work. And I decided to stay here. After I was doing some reporting for school, I realized that there was a big need for community news in this community, because it was a news desert. Most mainstream Chicago outlets weren't covering Cicero. It was a working class community of color. All the like there was no Spanish language news. And so through this process, like I met like a couple other journalists who are also from Cicero, and like they also had like the same ideas that like there was like a lot of us who were like thinking the same thing, that like, oh, there should be a news outlet in Cicero. So like the three, like me, April, Irene, we all kind of like came together and like started Cicero Independiente last year. Yeah, and like since then we've been doing about like one story a week. We still don't have like a full-time staff. We have like a couple part-time people, so like it's a lot of it like on our own time. Like so like, and like, yeah, so I still have a day job. I do digital communications for SCIU Local 1 while doing Cicero Independiente on the side.
Thank you, thank you. So guys, you see we brought together a eclectic group, diverse group. Every possible avenue and pathway in journalism is represented here. And so this is really, you can't buy this. I really love that we've got the person who hadn't intended to start a news organization and now runs a news outlet. I really love that we've got the person who's been in that digital space from that startup world from the very beginning, which was DNA in Chicago, and just kind of segued now into what DNA is, Block Club Chicago. I love the fact that we have this Chicagoan who, you know, was running her school newspaper or working for her school newspaper at Mother Macaulay. And so her destiny was etched in stone from the beginning and has gone from behind the scenes to in front of the camera. And I love that we have this person who is a multimedia skilled reporter who can do it all, and just kind of like, you know, thought they would focus on one sphere and ended up now, you know, they're covering hard news. So everyone that you possibly want to ask questions is here. So we'll get started. The very first question for our panel today: as millennials, you are all in the early stages of what every journalist hopes will be a long and successful career. But a lot has changed in journalism. As you survey the print, broadcast, and digital media of today, what would you say is your biggest challenge as you sit from your perch at your outlet and looking ahead into your future or your dreams, or where you think you want to be moving, or where you think that you will be or could be in the next 10 years, 20 years? So just looking at the landscape today, what is your biggest challenge? And we'll stay alphabetical, and we'll start with Mina.
This is a tough question. I've been thinking about it, and, you know, certainly the journalism industry is struggling in a lot of ways. We see a lot of legacy papers across the country hemorrhaging talent, even in our own city, and it's really hard to watch. You know, I do think that there are an increasing amount of digital operations like Block Club that are sprouting up, and that it is really encouraging, and this isn't a challenge, but this is really encouraging to me, and I think it should be encouraging to young people too, that the challenge, honestly, would be deciding where, you know, what path you want to take. Like, do you want to work for that legacy paper? Do you want to work for a digital startup like Block Club? Do you want to work, you know, for an independent operation, you know, out of Cicero, things like that? I mean, I think there are options, and especially in a city like Chicago, where there are just so many new nonprofit news organizations. And so that, to me, I'm overwhelmed by the amount of opportunities there are, because I'm sitting here and thinking, you know, I see this thriving media landscape in Chicago. I think Chicago is one of the best news towns in the world, and we have all of these new organizations like Block Club, but so many others too, Chalkbeat, and so many others that have popped up in the last few years. And I'm overwhelmed. I'm like, I don't know, what do I want to do next? You know, and so I think that, to me, which I know I'm turning around the question a little bit, but I think that there's a lot of optimism to be had. And I hope that people understand that, because There is so much doom and gloom that we hear about the journalism industry, and it's true. And I'm not disputing that, but I think that there's a lot to be excited about too. So I think there's an overwhelming amount of options for people, and certainly I can talk about all the challenges like that I have as far as things that we're seeing in technology, social media, and things like that. But just to your specific question, I think that would be my answer.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very hopeful. And next, we will go to Angel.
Yeah, I think piggybacking off of Mina a little bit, thinking about what is next, I think that is the hardest thing to think about at this age. I feel like when you're in school for so long, you're working toward the goal of your first job, and then you get your first job, and then, or for me, like my goal is to be a TV reporter in the city that I grew up in. And so now I'm in this place where I'm like, holy crap, this is what I wanted to do. What do I want to do after this? I don't know. Like every time someone asks me that, I'm like, I don't know. But I think with that, like Mina said, of just the optimism of there being so many options, I think it kind of creates a little bit of a challenge, because as a Black woman, we're seeing in this time right now, just of the conversations about race are a lot more prominent and prevalent. They're at the beginning of these conversations. And before that, especially in journalism, unfortunately, they were really not at the focal point of the conversation. They were a part of the conversation, but it was almost like your race was political, right? So like you had to really be unbiased. So I feel like up until this year, I never saw any of my colleagues ever talking about race from a personal perspective. And I think that is something really new that we're seeing this year that has completely changed what I want to do, because now I'm thinking about, okay, it's unfortunate to say, but okay, so it's being a Black woman in media is cool now, right? And I can say that I'm the Black girl that's on TV, versus before it was like not something that I could really bring up. And so just kind of thinking about what role do I want to play in media as a Black woman? Do I want my race to be at the forefront of everything that I'm talking about, or do I want it to play a part? And I think now we have that option to think about what role we want that to play. But for me, it's kind of figuring out, is it too much? Is it not enough? Because for so long I had grown up to think that I had to be unbiased and I could not, personally speak on racial issues. And now that has completely changed. And that's kind of really completely changed the trajectory, I think, of journalism. And I think as a result has really forced me to be like, okay, so now that we can have these conversations and I'm not looked at as a biased journalist, where can I go? I can really go anywhere, versus before, I don't think that was the case.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Angel. Very, very pertinent issue. And we'll discuss some of that when we talk about how the social unrest has framed our panelists' work. But we'll continue on with their greatest challenges. And so Nader, you're up.
Yeah, so for me, I've sort of had like a career path in mind. I have different things I want to cover, beats in mind, goals that I want to attain. For me, the challenge has been now recently, at least, thinking of which news organizations would sort of align with my values, because I think a lot of legacy outlets don't necessarily align with my values. The way that certain coverage is done, the way that newsroom atmospheres are sort of not always welcoming to people of color. I'm starting to struggle with, okay, there are all of these places that could help me reach my goals, and I could cover the things that I want to cover, yet I'm not necessarily sure I want to have my name tied to them because of the way they cover current events. And I think this is sort of a new thing that has popped up in my mind, because before this summer, I mean, I still had these same values, but I don't think I thought of my own work or like myself as having that like independent worth, if that makes sense, where I'm the one that's offering them my services. I don't need that big outlet to to take me. And so it's just a way of thinking that has shaped how I view my career moving forward. I mean, no legacy outlet is immune to racist coverage, and I would say that top of mind for me is going to be, are there independent places like what Mina's talking about? We have a vibrant independent journalism scene in Chicago, Injustice Watch, Block Club, Chicago Reporter. I mean, there are some really quality places that are producing good journalism. The Tribe, I can't forget the Tribe. And so is that sort of the way I want to go moving forward? Is there going to be a place, if independent media keeps growing around the country, is there going to be a place that can help me accomplish my goals and sort of be an outlet at which I can cover the things I want to cover? Is it something I'm going to have to create? Is it worth the fight going to a legacy outlet and trying to reshape its coverage, which is modeling, what we're working on at the Sun-Times. And so it's something that's always in my head now. And for me, I want to be somewhere moving forward that aligns with my values, because no matter the care that I put into my work, the nuance that I put into my work, if there's other work at under my masthead, under my organization's name that doesn't align with my values, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with it. And so for me, that's just really top of mind.
Thank you. Nader, gosh, this is turning out to be a really good conversation. Very relevant and timely issues. Ankur, you're up. Challenges.
All right, yeah, I think similar to Nader, trying to find a newsroom that aligns with your values, I think is really hard. I think like when I graduated from Northwestern, that was something I was like really conscious of, like trying to, I think I looked around at the jobs that were available and saw that none of them aligned with my values. And I was like, all right, I'm not interested in applying for any of these jobs. I'm gonna start my own thing in Cicero.
Wow.
That's also really hard. Like it's like hard running like an independent thing and like trying to make it sustainable. And like, yeah, there's a lot of funding for like independent news media, but it's like definitely not enough funding. Like we don't have enough funding to cover, like have a full staff. And so like, I still have to have like a day job, and like balancing those two things is like really difficult.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I think just like the long-term sustainability of like independent news is like just really challenging, because I think like so much of it is shifting to like the nonprofit model, but like nonprofits are like also not sustainable. Like grant money is not sustainable. Nonprofits like very much exploit their workers, it seems like every other corporation does. So it's like, how do you create something that doesn't recreate the same like toxic culture that a lot of nonprofits have, is like really difficult, while also trying to like still get access to the same resources. Yeah, it's hard.
Thank you. So friends and family who are listening, we've got Mina telling you that, you know what? My greatest challenge is trying to figure out where I'm going to go with this explosion of opportunities that are out here. So that really counters the doom and gloom that you always hear about our industry. And then you've got Angel talking about a very relevant issue as race becomes front and center in this nation, as it reckons with its structural racism in the wake of George Floyd's killing. You know, there are these nuances that change how you are portrayed in your job, and unfortunately do create new pathways where those pathways should have existed all along. So that's really important to remember. And then Nader talks about, well, you know what? Yeah, you can talk doom and gloom, but my thing is, I gotta be comfortable where I'm at. And so it doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter where you're working. There's always a question for those of us who are in that space. Are you comfortable with the philosophy of your employer? Is that employer's values aligned with yours? And so, being able to have that choice to make those, to ask yourself those questions, and know that there's a lot of opportunity out here, as he just said, independent media, nonprofit space, it's all there. So you can ask yourself those questions and make those choices. And Ankur talks about, you know what? If those outlets or opportunities don't seem to appeal to you, start your own. Start your own. But he notes that there are challenges. Sustainability is always a challenge. It's a challenge for Block Club, where Mina's at. It's a challenge for the Sun-Times, where Nader and I are at. It's a challenge for the TV stations, and it's most definitely a challenge for independent media like Ankur's. And we're gonna move on to the next question, which really touches on what each one of them have skimmed. And that is, how has COVID-19, firstly, and then secondly, the social unrest in the wake of George Floyd's killing reshaped your work? So COVID-19 first, and then the post-George Floyd reckoning with race. Back to you, Mina.
Another hard question. I think with the pandemic, I mean, the world has completely changed.
Yes.
You know, everything about our world has changed.
Yeah.
And so all the stories have changed.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we are reporting every single day on how the pandemic is impacting people in the neighborhoods. And we really see every story, whether it's like directly related to the pandemic or not, through the lens of the pandemic, because we're living in a pandemic. And so absolutely, the pandemic has changed everything that we cover. And I think, you know, we're the kind of news outlet at Block Club where, you know, we're trying to cover the full spectrum. We're not just trying to cover all the doom and gloom, but we're also not trying to cover, you know, all the fluffy news either, but we're trying to sort of have a full spectrum. And I think, I really do think, to be totally frank, that that we are because of the times that we're in, we are prioritizing the stories with, you know, with moral force, that stories that that are going to make a difference in people's lives during this pandemic, because it matters and because we're in these times where we can make a difference. And so I think that we're really talking through these long form stories and these features, investigations, and stories that are really going to, you know, that are really going to make a difference in these communities amid the pandemic. So I think we're really focused on making sure that those stories get told, because of the times that we're in. That's not to say that we don't cover lighthearted stories, because we do. Right. But certainly we've made a choice to prioritize these stories that will make a difference. And then with the unrest, I mean, it's really the same thing. I mean, we are every story we do, we are looking through a new lens. Right. And I think the founders of Block Club and the editors of Block Club have made it, have just from the very beginning said, we want to be a different type of news organization. We want to have Black and brown people at the top of our news organization and guiding our coverage. And so we're working toward that and every single day. And I think having people in the newsroom, reporters and editors of color who can say, you know, this is what needs to be covered, and you know, offer their perspective. I mean, that's so crucial, and the fact that that it wasn't happening before is just absurd. So I think we're thinking about issues of race in the newsroom so much more than we were, you know, years ago. But I really do think from the very beginning, Block Club, we wanted to be a different kind of news organization where people felt like there were different voices that were telling these stories, and people of different backgrounds telling these stories. So it's really only crystallized, I think, what we've been trying to do from the start. But, you know, there's so many other things, like, you know, we think that, you know, covering protests is important, you know, in a way that certainly covering protests was important before, but covering protests is really important. And I think we need to make sure that voices are elevated. We need to make sure that when we're at protests and events, that people of color are interviewed. I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we're thinking about, and the industry as a whole should have been thinking about for a very long time. And so I think we're just thinking about all these things so much more than we were, and I'm so glad that we are.
Thank you, Mina. Well said. Angel.
So I would say for me, again, so I do arts coverage in the city. So pretty much unlike everyone else here, you do education, but you did news for a while. But I feel like education and news kind of can intersect a lot of times, and art definitely can as well, but I don't think it can as seamlessly. So I think for me, the biggest thing when the pandemic started was really just being sensitive to the fact that people probably didn't want to hear about a new art gallery or a new painter or something like that, right? So just thinking about how I could connect art to what was going on. And so at first, my coverage was kind of looking at, so the art communities across the country are the first to close, last to open, and that's still the case. So when my coverage began during the pandemic, that was pretty much what a lot of my stories were. That's what all of my stories were. And that kind of got really draining, not only for me, but I know for viewers, for the people that I was interviewing, because here I am asking the same questions of how are you going to stay open? And now looking back, that was in March, right? So all of those businesses that I've spoken with, majority are not in business anymore. So that was just really hard for me to talk about what was going on in the art community while being sensitive to everything else that was happening, because granted, these are small business owners, but there are also so many people dealing with health issues, right? And then just like other businesses, but then on top of these businesses too. So I kind of felt like what I was talking about was not really at the forefront of the conversation. So for me at the beginning, a lot of it was figuring out how to figure out like what the art community's place in this conversation was. And I think that definitely got easier as artists got used to the pandemic and started getting really innovative with like virtual classes or just social distancing or still creating art in response to the pandemic. And so then that kind of shifted my coverage a little bit from how are they coping to now this is how they're creating art during the pandemic. And so that's kind of the place that I'm in now. And I think it's a lot better because we've obviously gotten so used to it. And of course, for like the first 3 months, we didn't even have a story in our show that was not directly related to how COVID was impacting our communities. So I would say, I mean, already I'm able to kind of cover a lot more, and my coverage has gotten back to normal, but it's still that same kind of, this is how artists are coping with what's happening. This is what they're doing in spite of. This is a lot of times how artists are changing from one medium to another to support themselves. But then of course, there are still so many artists that are not able to do anything. And then just kind of figuring out how to put that into a story that is encouraging, because I think the other thing about my stories in particular in our show, it's kind of one of the lighter moments. And so our newscast is very different from other news styles where our show is an hour versus others are 30 minutes. And we're really diving deep into conversations that are impacting our communities. And I think that oftentimes after you come off of a 10-minute conversation of the latest whatever's happening in Chicago, you kind of just like want to take a little breather. And my coworker didn't realize I was in a Zoom and is waving. But you want to take a breather and just find out about a fun art class that you can take virtually, or just kind of do something else to take your mind off of what's going on. Not forget about what's going on, but just kind of take a little break. And so that's kind of the role I've taken on, both during the pandemic, as well as the protests and riots as a result of George Floyd's death. And that, of course, which I already spoke on, as a Black woman, it just kind of completely changed my coverage. It made me feel truthfully more comfortable, more open, more honest with being a Black woman. Obviously, you know that when you look at me right away, but I think a lot of times just for example, we're just seeing women of color start to wear their hair natural on air. We see I'm wearing braids. This is not something that I would have done 2 years ago. And I mean, we have Maud, someone who has been rocking locks for so long, where she's made it a norm for herself, but that wasn't necessarily the norm for all journalists of color. And so just kind of looking at, I think since George Floyd's death, how I can kind of be more of myself as a journalist. Not to say that I haven't been. I've always been Angel with kind of a loud laugh and a toothy smile. But I think, I mean, obviously, like I said, you know that I'm Black, but just me feeling more comfortable in that, and that being reflective in my work. I don't really know how to describe how my Blackness is more reflective in my work, but I think just feeling more comfortable to be yourself can impact your storytelling. And I think that that has definitely done that for me.
Yeah, thank you, Angel. Thank you. Nader.
Yes, so I think in my role covering schools, COVID and the protests this summer have had a similar effect, in that I already knew how big of a role schools played in this country in sort of our social net and our social safety net, and making sure that schools are basically keeping families alive. But I think once the pandemic started, and for example, so far there have been 25 million meals passed out by Chicago public schools since March. Schools are serving as education, they're serving as food pantries, they're serving as shelter. I mean, the fact that during a pandemic, we have to debate going back to schools because some kids won't have a place to go is just mind-boggling. And it shows you sort of as a society, our failures in putting all of these social safety nets in one place. And I knew that already. I knew that schools played a huge role, right? But now it in front of my eyes became life or death. I could see it literally. It is life or death. People will go hungry if CPS is not passing out meals. And it sort of opened my eyes to, okay, well, what other angles can I look at with this? I did in April or May, I did a profile on a student who is homeless. She doesn't have a permanent home. I talked to her and her mother, and they're sort of bouncing. I first talked to them before the pandemic and hadn't had a chance to finish the story. And then I interviewed them again after COVID started, and sort of seeing how they're bouncing around from home to home, not having air conditioning. She doesn't have a laptop at home to do her work. And now that's a huge problem because it's remote learning. And just seeing all of the things that schools sort of provide for families has been important. And I've always viewed schools as all of our societal problems sort of start at schools, right? Schools are underfunded, and that sort of leads to everything else. And so for me, that sort of social injustice element has always been tied into schools. And I first approached the beat with that mindset of, okay, well, I'm gonna look at where there's inequity in CPS, and that has sort of guided a lot of my work. I don't want to pretend that like I was the perfect education reporter in that sense. This summer has taught me a ton. I mean, all of these great organizers, these activists, have really, really pointed out some things that I hadn't thought of. And even while I've approached it from that lens to start. And so for me, it's sort of been a teaching moment, a learning moment this summer with everything that's happened, because as reporters, we sort of need to approach things from the perspective that we know little about what we're covering, and we need to find out. And so the pandemic has taught me a lot. All of the people who are taking to the streets for Black Lives Matter have taught me a lot. And every day sort of now I'm thinking, okay, how can I approach this with a new angle? where are the inequities that I can find? And also, I mean, this was important before, but it's especially important now, thinking of positive news angles. Because, I mean, everything is so depressing. um, and it was before, and especially now it is. And so I've sort of had to more proactively find ways to balance our coverage. And the last thing that I think has this summer has reshaped my work is when I write, I like to be very, like, I like to pay a lot of close attention to the words that I use because I think language matters a lot. And I've done that from the start, I feel like. There have been times where I haven't been as nuanced as I would like, but from the start, I feel like I try to show care in my language. This summer, where there have been times where I have to sort of fight battles with my editors, those battles have diminished a little bit. I think there have been people, especially when we're talking about a legacy outlet, there have been white men who are editors who have started this summer as sort of forced them to understand that we need to be active in our language. We need to be direct in our language. And this summer has helped me sort of push back. And there's still ways to go. I mean, there's miles to go. But this summer has definitely helped in that sense and has made it easier to express the things that I want to express in my reporting that maybe would have been more difficult before.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Nader. And Ankur, how has COVID-19 and the social unrest shaped your work?
Yeah, it shaped it a lot. I think the COVID pandemic like really exacerbated like a lot of the issues we already saw that were prevalent, especially like in Cicero. Like even before the pandemic, we knew that Cicero was a predominantly working class Spanish-speaking community who weren't getting information in Spanish. We knew it had a town government notorious for corruption who was like very rarely like served the interests of the community. And when the COVID-19 pandemic started, like all of that sort of like just got bigger. Like at the very beginning, like when we were all learning, still even like trying to learn what was what COVID was and like how it affected you, like the CDC and like Illinois Department of Health, like most of their information was out in English, like they weren't translating that stuff. And so and then like Cicero was like a community of essential workers who were like more at risk of like getting COVID. And so like very quickly, early in the spring, like Cicero became like one of like the highest suburb in Cook County suburb that had like the most cases of COVID-19. And so like we really quickly had to adjust to covering this crisis. A lot of our early coverage was just like providing information in Spanish, like here's what COVID is, here's how it affects you, here's where all the things are closed, here's where you can get tested, here's like resources if you need like food or like help, things like that. I think like those were like really, really important stories. Like those are all of our most read stories from like the past year. It's like stuff providing the resources. And then like very quickly, like we had workers at a local factory like reach out to us who were saying like, hey, our employer, they're not enforcing social distancing, they're not giving us masks, like a lot of us are getting COVID and like they're not telling anyone. Like it was just like a whole like mess. And so like we reported on that really quickly. And then like 2 days later, like a lot of the workers who were quoted in that story were fired. And like the town and Cicero government like clearly like didn't do anything. Like they did another inspection, thought it was fine. So it was just like a combination of like so many things that were already happening in Cicero, but just like sped up really quickly. And like our team being like pretty small and like young, like it was like difficult for us to like transition to doing that kind of like work where things were like changing like really quickly. Like I don't know, things were changing like every couple hours and like we're not like a daily news site. And so it was like hard for us to like keep up with that reporting at that like speed. But I think we figured it out. We were able to get some like additional funding and like hire like a part-time reporter just to cover COVID, which helped a lot. But yeah, it was like super overwhelming. Yeah, just like really like a really, really overwhelming time. And then like June 1st, like when the George Floyd stuff hit, like that also like really like impacted like Cicero. And I think like in a lot of ways, Cicero was like a hotspot for like a lot of the different things that were happening. Just like we saw like really intense like racial unrest in Cicero, where we saw like groups of like Latinx residents like beating up Black people on the street who they thought or who they assumed were like incorrectly looting. And like at the end of the day, like 2 people were killed. And it's like hard to, it's like, I don't know, it's just like hard to like cover that when it's like happening in your own community, especially like the person who was killed like happened like right next to my apartment. Like I saw like riot cops like out my window, so it's like hard. It's like
Wow.
it just like hits different when it's like affecting you personally in your own like community, and you're seeing like people you care about like in the streets like trying to like help de-escalate. And like some of our reporters were like, a lot of our reporters were like in the streets like trying to de-escalate, and like had like family members who were like impacted by all that stuff. So I think it was like, yeah, I think it was like an interesting way of like seeing like, I think our coverage of that is like I think you can see the difference in our coverage being like people who like live in the community and like are from the community, and like our coverage of those events versus like a lot of like the reporters that were coming from like Chicago. And so, yeah, so it was just like a really overwhelming time where like we like got hit with like a lot of like really devastating stuff like really quickly. Yeah, and just like really heavy like life and death stuff that like that we weren't like ready for. But I think we managed it well, and we're still like working through it. And I think we've like adjusted to like the new normal we're in, and we're still doing our COVID coverage. But yeah, I don't know, it was just like a really difficult, hard time. But I think considering our resources, I think we did a good job.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I am so enjoying this conversation, and the insights that you four are providing are just immeasurable. So family, those of you who are with us tonight, Mina talks about how the digital startup that she works for, because it's a hyper-local outlet, has always kind of operated with a different mindset, and that whole mindset of trying to make sure that they reflect the neighborhoods that they cover, and that they do things differently than the huge newsrooms that have existed for years. So, you know, with George Floyd and COVID, you know, again, at the neighborhood level, they continue to operate with that same mindset. And Angel has talked about how, you know, when you cover a beat at a outlet, you suddenly have something like COVID-19 and the George Floyd factor, you have to figure out, how does your beat now pivot? Where does your beat fit in to the current affairs? Do you continue to do lighthearted arts pieces when everyone is talking about race and racism? Do you continue to, you know, to showcase arts organizations that are dying when, you know, there are people who are dying, and how much of that do you focus on? So you have to find a way to fit in to the new norm and make sure you are still covering your beat. And she talks about doing that in a very good way. And Nader, you know, is talking about how in the past, some of the values that informed, you know, his language, his choice of language in describing some of these issues, he's had, you know, to fight with editors in some of these large newsrooms who didn't get it prior to George Floyd this summer. And the post George Floyd reckoning with race, and how it's now much easier to use that language and no longer back away from the blatant truth and what's going on. And he doesn't have to have those fights as much anymore. And it's about the shifting times we live in. And then Ankur just gave us a really, you know, great snapshot of when you're a small independent operation, an entrepreneur, and all of a sudden you're hit with two very fast moving stories. You've got to make it work. You've got to do it. Otherwise you die. Otherwise you become irrelevant. And so, you know, with the very small newsroom, they had to fight to stay on top of COVID-19, which we all know, even those of us in the large newsrooms, was a ever-changing story. It changed by the hour. And so imagine a small operation trying to stay on top of that, but also knowing your niche, you know, making sure that information that was needed by his community was available in Spanish. So, you know, that's important. And also how the George Floyd becomes an issue when racism is right there under your window, next door, where you're seeing it in the street. It's different. It's different when it hits home. And I think that all of us can agree with that. In the interest of time, we're gonna shoot straight to the individual questions that we had for each panelist before we take your questions, family. So We'll start with you, Mina. You first broke the Black Club Chicago story about Chance the Snapper, the now famous alligator that was found in Chicago's Humboldt Park Lagoon last summer. Your managing editor, Stephanie Lulay, called it the scoop of a lifetime, quote unquote. Could you tell us how you came upon that amazing story that, as Nader has mentioned, he and everybody else had to chase you on?
Well, yeah, I can tell you more about it. It's fun to talk about now because it feels like it was so far. It feels like it was years ago that this happened, because so much has happened in the world since then. But okay, so Chance the Snapper. So what happened is there was a reader who reached out early in the morning. I think it was like maybe 7 or 8 in the morning or something like that. They just emailed us through our tip line, and he said clearly, like, there's an alligator in the Humboldt Park Lagoon. People are talking about it. We want to know why it's there and what they're gonna do to get it out of there. And you should come here and figure it out because we want to know. And so my editor-in-chief Seamus sent it over to me. It was early. I think it was like 7:30 in the morning. I don't always get up that early, especially if I'm working late the night before. But he was kind of like, let's make this a priority for the morning. Like, you should go out there and check this out. And I, in my head, was like, okay. Like, we follow at Block Club, and I don't know that I've done a good job of articulating this, but we cover everything. Like, there's no story too small for Block Club. Like, we've covered like a crack in the sidewalk and how neighbors are frustrated by a crack in the sidewalk. Like, we've covered, we cover tiny housing developments. We cover, like new businesses all the time. And we cover these things that, like local small town papers would cover, but
right.
we're concentrated on the neighborhoods. So an alligator in the lagoon definitely fits that criteria, but it didn't mean that I wasn't. So, wasn't like, okay, is it like a plastic bag or something? It's probably a plastic bag.
Right.
So I went there and I worked the story really hard. I mean, for like the entire day, I was arguing with these park district officials and trying to get them. There was a photo they were passing around of the alligator, and I was like, I need that proof that there's actually an alligator. But then they were, they didn't want to talk to a reporter. Their bosses didn't want it. So I was arguing with them for it felt like hours. And then I finally met this one guy who was a security guard who was really nice, and he was like, I'll get the photo for you. And I was like, okay, like I'll wait in the parking lot, and this is how this stuff works. And so I waited in the parking lot. It was so hot. It was like 100 degrees out that day, and I think he brought me like an iced tea or something because he felt bad for me. And then he eventually brought me the photo of the alligator that they had all been passing around, and it was like a Loch Ness photo. You couldn't tell at all. It was an alligator. But really, after that photo, the police showed up, animal control showed up, the Sun Times showed up. I mean, like everybody showed up. And then very quickly we had this guy, Alligator Bob, who showed up and was on this crusade to get this alligator. And we did, within like an hour or two of that Loch Ness photo, we did get a really good photo. And so we're like, no, this is real. There's an alligator in the lagoon. So long story short, it was just a full day in the heat of trying to get them to send me this photo that would prove that there was an alligator, and to just talk to people and see what they saw. And it didn't come together until in the afternoon, but it came from one of our readers. Our readers are amazing and perceptive and wonderful. And so we would be nothing without them. So it started as a tip, and then it just grew from there, and it became this sensation, and I wouldn't give to go back to that. So
Thank you, Mina. We're enjoying more lighthearted, talking about more lighthearted fare ourselves. So Nader, during your first several months at the Chicago Sun-Times, you were one of the paper's top read writers. I mean, that's not too shabby in an entire editorial operation. Can you share with us some of the more popular stories that you've covered? that went viral and got a lot of exposure, like that brought you to that level?
Well, I'm gonna be honest. I didn't come prepared for this. I'm gonna try to think back. I can say that on the education beat, the past year, my most read stuff has been stories that sort of take a unique angle and a unique approach, and that's sort of I can sort of speak to why I think people read my stories, but
Sure.
when I started, I've sort of come in with the mindset of let me sort of figure out what no one else is doing. And one thing that I will say I've noticed is that nobody else, not nobody, but a lot of people aren't as direct with the language, talking about race and talking about injustice that we've sort of mentioned. So I think that for a lot of people has stood out. I try to be as direct as possible, like I said. And then sort of building sources and getting behind the scenes and stuff. So I can think back, one piece that a lot of people read was right after the teachers' strike last fall. I had this piece sort of, it was like a postmortem on the strike and looking behind the scenes at sort of what were the politics at play between the mayor's office and the teachers union, and even sort of like a mini rift between CPS and the mayor's office, and people like that behind the scenes stuff. So that's one type of thing. And then Ankur actually mentioned this too, that this is something that is big for in Cicero, but people really read service journalism. I mean, stuff like CPS for a day in the pandemic stopped distributing food because of the looting. And I put together a story on here are different, and the same day, I think some of the major food pantries in the city stopped distributing food too because they were worried about looting. And so we put something together on here's where you can still get food, and here are the community groups stepping up. Here are the like independent volunteers stepping up. The Times, all that. That was really widely read.
Got it.
Service journalism like that people can use, that people sort of need for services that they use. That has been really widely read, I think.
Got it. Thank you. And Ankur, last year when you co-founded Cicero Independiente, you had an idea of the sort of stories that you were looking to publish. What are your thoughts on the impact of the publication on its hyperlocal community?
Yeah, I think we've had a pretty big impact. Like before this, there was no local news outlet in Cicero. And I think like also given like Cicero's history with like corruption and like FBI, like people like Betty Lauren Maltese and like the mob and things like that. Like all that stuff has continued, like that hasn't stopped. It's just like reporting about it has stopped. And we know, so I think we like immediately started like doing basic things like going to like town board meetings and like covering like just like local government institutions, and like we like heard from a lot of like parents and things like that like especially like since it is a Spanish speaking community, a lot of folks like don't necessarily know how to engage with like the school board or how to engage with like the town of Cicero like city council, or like how to advocate for themselves. So a lot of the times we'll like show up to these meetings and like be able to ask like these like harder questions that like parents themselves like don't know how to ask or like how to maneuver, and then like provide that information to them. So that's been like really helpful. I think like like our service journalism has been like really helpful, and like trying to figure out how like these local governing institutions work, because they're like a minefield in Cicero. You never know if the meeting's actually going to happen or not, or like if the agenda and so I think like, and especially providing that information in Spanish is like really important, just because it is like a Spanish speaking community, and we wanted to like be able to like inform, like I don't know, it just made sense, like why wouldn't you have it in Spanish. And I think we've covered a lot of like important stories, like even like the smaller stories that don't get covered a lot. Those have been good. Like we wrote about a food pantry. I think one of the cool stories we did like really early on that I think is like unique that like we were able to do is like Irene like wrote a story about like a michelada business that opened up in Cicero. And so like it was like started by like this like two brothers, I think, and they just like started this like it's like this drink. And so like what I love about the story so much is that like during their interview, like they're talking to her, like they're switching back and forth in English and Spanish. And so like a lot of the quotes are like in English and Spanish. And I feel like at like somewhere else, like would have had to choose, like you're gonna publish it all in English and all in Spanish. But I think like we were able to like publish the article in Spanglish, like the quotes are in Spanish, but everything else is in English. And I think that like worked really well because it's like our community does like talk like that. They do like go back and forth in English and Spanish. And so like, why wouldn't we have our writing like reflect the way the community talks? And I think like somewhere else, like that might have been like a fight you would have to have like with an editor that like we didn't necessarily need to have. We could just like do it. So that's been like some of the advantages of like running our own thing, like getting to decide like our own values and like actually like enforcing it, or not enforcing it, just like playing them out and like having them develop ourselves. Like not having to ask for permission to do things, like we can just like go and do it and like develop it. And like it's a good place to like experiment and try new things. So yeah, like we're like interested in like structuring ourselves as like a workers co-op or like a consumer co-op, and like figuring out like how that can like affect our relationship with like residents. So like we're just like experiment. It's like nice because we're like in a place where like we can just experiment with different things and like try and like figure out like different ways of doing journalism. So that's like really like it's a lot of fun. Like that's nice.
Very cool. Very cool. I really like that. Publishing, writing in did you call it Spanglish? I think that is so cool because yeah, wow, why wouldn't you? That's the way people talk. And yeah, I think Nader, you and I would have had to like move heaven and earth to get that approved at the Sun Times. Anyway, Angel, take us home. As arts correspondent for Chicago Tonight, you get to cover some really interesting topics, from garage art in Evanston to ducks on the Magnificent Mile. Can you share with us 2 or 3 of your most meaningful stories that you've covered and how you happened upon those stories?
Yeah, so I would say one story I really enjoyed, like Nader, I was not prepared to list off my faves. I'm like, what's on the dome?
That's all right.
But one that really speaks to me was before the pandemic. It was with an African arts collective group known as Diaspora Rhythms. And so they just really push and promote supporting Black art, buying Black art, collecting Black art, and then showcasing it in your homes. And I think that was just so fun for me growing up at home. It's like you don't want to have any clutter on the walls. You want it to be very kind of like structured and just kind of together. And their organization was the complete opposite of that. And so it was just really cool to tell a story that promotes art in a fashion that does not encourage you to like maybe go to the art institute, but maybe to create your own art institute in your house. And that is just something that was so foreign to me because, like I said, where I live at home, like my walls are white, there's nothing on them. And that was just really important to me to understand the value in not only supporting Black artists, but having your own art collection, right? Because the artist or the collector that I interviewed, he went on to have some original pieces from the Afro-Cobra movement, right?
Wow.
The Black Panther. So it was just like very, very cool to see the longevity of just what it means when you can support art to that level of owning art, because I think oftentimes we think art is something that we can consume. And for me, that was kind of an aha moment of realizing like, oh, not only can you support it, but you can buy it and you can interact with it in your home. And so that's one story I think really stuck out to me. But I would say overall, all the stories I've done have been pretty different and very diverse. I don't ever try to do any 2 stories that are the same. So tonight I have a story on about an anonymous Chicago artist named Don't Fret. Last week, or maybe it was the week before, I had a story about a Balinese dancer based out of Evanston. So every story, no 2 stories are the same with me. Even if I'm covering a mural, public art in any way, there's always a different message. Because I think, of course, every artist has the same goal of wanting to be expressive, but just showcasing, you know, how they feel about that in a different way. So I've been all over the city. Yeah, I'm like, what stories can I think of? I would say that one was probably one of the biggest ones, and then Balinese dancing.
Cool.
And then if I had to think of one more, I did end up doing a story. No, sorry, that's too long. Yep, I'm just gonna go with those 2.
That's okay. That's all right. That's sufficient. That's very cool. Thank you, all of you. All right, now comes time for the family to ask questions. Stephanie, you've got questions keyed up?
I do. All right. Well, first of all, I just want to say that this has been a great discussion so far. Thanks to all of our panelists for such insightful thoughts. And thank you to all of our viewers for submitting some great questions so far. I've been sifting through them so far. So this next question is going to be a combination of two submitters because they're kind of similar and they overlap. So these questions are going to be for our panelists of color. So how are established journalist organizations supporting folks like you to ensure your voices are supported and promoted? That comes from Shalindra Singh. And the second part of that question is coming from Mallory Chang. How do you prevent burnout / protecting your peace when working in predominantly white spaces? So I'm going to start by tossing that to Angel, and then we can go to Nader and then to Ankur.
Okay, so I remember the second part, you said how to prevent burnout, but then the first part, could you repeat that, the first question?
Sure. It is, how are established journalist organizations supporting folks like you to ensure your voices are supported and promoted?
I think just off the bat, hiring a person of color and trusting their judgment, their journalist style, their, journalist integrity. So with WTTW, obviously they knew that I was a person of color and that was not something that they shied away from. And every time I pitch a story of regarding anything, they're always so supportive. And they say, if you think that this is a conversation that we need to be having on our show, we trust your judgment. And that's been how it has been from day one. And so that has not been my experience at every job I've had. Even at my last job, I actually, pivoting into the second question, to prevent burnout when you're working with only white people or non-people of color, I think you have to just remember that you're the only person of color. Unfortunately, at my last job, I had an instance where I was making it known that I was Black every day and I was never shy about it or anything. And so then anytime anything happened, I had something to say about it. And I realized that my colleagues oftentimes didn't care. And so I realized I was burning myself out by kind of, talking to this wall of being like, this is a conversation we need to have. And they didn't care. And it got to the point where, unfortunately, I got into an argument with my news director. Like, we raised our voices. It was like the most unprofessional. It wasn't unprofessional. It was unprofessional in the sense that I raised my voice, but speaking up was where I felt like I needed to just speak up and defend myself. And so I think in that situation, I learned that you kind of have to figure out when to pick your battles. Unfortunately, it's really negative. I don't think it's negative. I think it's honest to say that you can only advocate and rely on yourself. All of your colleagues will more than likely have your best interest at heart, but you will have your best interest at heart ultimately. And you have to remember that and not take anything personally. That's the other thing. Take everything personally, and I had to get a thicker skin and realize that these are just my colleagues. They just want to go home at the end of the day like me. And everything is not about them working, going out of their way to make me feel like I'm the only Black girl. So just kind of recognizing that. I don't know if I really even answered that question, but you just really have to pick your battles, I think. This is some things that I may not stand with, Nader may stand with, and vice versa. So it's just kind of like you really have to think of what is at the core of like, how will you be able to sleep at night? And then also remembering that just because you're advocating for yourself, there's nothing wrong with that because you're speaking up. I think oftentimes, especially, so I'm 26, and so like this is my second job out of school. So for my first year, I wouldn't say like sorry, but I would kind of treat my bosses like they were my professors in a sense, because I was so used to that superior and like student lifestyle that when I got here, my coworker was like, Angel, you're a coworker, girl. You don't have to say sorry. And I was like, oh, wow, like I don't. And I even still say sorry or just, do little stuff like that. But I think just kind of picking your battles and remembering that you are here and that you deserve to be here, and continuing to surround yourself with people, that support you.
No, that's great. That's great. In the interest of time, why don't we just throw that question also to Nader and only have 2 people answer each question? Nader.
Yeah, I think, I really like what Angel said about making sure your own voice is supported and promoted. You have to sort of be your biggest advocate because no one else is going to advocate for you. And making sure that your voice is heard. If there's something you don't like, speak up and say something. I think a lot of times especially at legacy outlets, the people in charge haven't necessarily been in your shoes. They don't know what it's like to work as a person of color in a predominantly white newsroom because they are white. And so they're not going to be, a lot of times, actively reaching out and saying like, hey, what do you think? You have a different perspective. You need to, and it sucks because the onus is sort of on you to not have your own voice be silenced, but you have to sort of speak up and say, hey, I want part of this conversation too. In terms of supporting us and making sure our voices are promoted, I think it's a work in progress. I think that's sort of the work that we're doing now, is making sure that people's voices are heard, because everyone has a voice. It's just about which ones do you prioritize. And then the issue about burnout, every so often I take a week off Twitter, for example, or I'll like burn out completely and take a week off work. It's just, that happened to me a few weeks ago. When we're talking about working in predominantly white spaces as a person of color, it can be exhausting because it's not an exaggeration. Every day there's something that happens that crosses your mind and says, well, couldn't it have been this way, or this, or microaggressions, whatever it is. And so not letting it's hard, but not letting it get to you, and sort of leaving work at work, which is even harder now that we're at home. But making sure that whatever you're fighting for, whatever you're doing at work, is left at work, and you're still keeping your personal time, because mental health is important. And if you're not in a place mentally where you're healthy, then the stuff you're doing at work isn't going to be productive anyway.
Thank you, Nader. I really like family, what each of them said. Angel said, you have to pick your battles. And good, kudos to you that you figured that out only 10 years in. It took me a little while because I was doing the exact same thing. I was banging my head against the wall trying to make people care. It took a while for me to realize, breathe and pick your battles. and Nader, makes a very important point. In this day and age, when we're all assailed from every angle with just the most intense traumatic news happening across this country, mental health has to be a concern. We have to protect our mental health. And I love that Nader takes a week off of Twitter intermittently. I need to learn to do that. So family, take this in. This is such good insight. Stephanie, next question.
All right, so this next question comes to us from Elizabeth Stanton, and I just want to point out that Liz has been a panelist of ours on a couple of our events in the past, so thanks so much for tuning in tonight, Liz. So this question goes back to what the panelists were talking about earlier in terms of challenges they face. So as early career journalists working at a crucial time in our country, what do you think needs to change in news and journalism for the field to be a strong pillar in our society where these values are reflected? Since Angel and Nader answered that last question, I'm going to turn this one over to Mina and Ankur.
Awesome. Mina, ladies first.
Okay. I think that, and I hope that I'm understanding the question correctly, but I think that for journalism to be what it should be, I think that, and it's really what we've been talking about this whole time, is that we need to make sure that we're uplifting all sorts of people and their voices. And so that's part of the reason why I love Black Club so much, is because like I'm out in the neighborhoods talking to neighbors who never get interviewed about anything, who have never talked to a reporter ever, who don't even know, who don't know the first thing about doing an interview with a reporter. And to me, that matters. That matters a lot because we want our stories to be reflective of our communities. We don't want to be going to the same stakeholders, the same politicians, the police. We don't want to be relying on these authority figures to tell our stories. We want the communities to be the ones telling the stories. So I think for me, I think that getting that wide range of voices is really important and has always been important to me as a reporter, but is even more important now with everything going on in the world. And I think that going forward, you know, we just have to make more of an effort to get all of those voices. The other thing I will say, and this is really more of just a thought that I think about a lot, is, you know, journalism has changed so much in that we use social media in such an interesting way. And so for journalism to be what it should be, we have to be really diligent about social media and debunking all of the misinformation that's out there. And we talk a lot about that at Block Club, and we did at DNA Info, because this is where people are getting their information, is social media. And so we have to really uphold those journalistic standards and really fight to make sure that we're getting the most accurate information, and we're not spreading misinformation. And so that's something I think about a lot, because social media isn't going away, and we're just going to keep seeing this happen, where misinformation is spreading like wildfire. Yep. And I think we have a responsibility as journalists to really make sure that we're debunking this stuff. So I think that there's a lot that we have to do to make sure that journalism is what it needs to be and is a pillar of our society. But I think that something that I think about a lot at Block Club and before at DNA Info is like those old school journalistic values. Like if your mother says, you know, she loves you, check it out. Like that's still a thing. Don't forget that. That's really important. Like those are really, really important values. But the world is changing. And so social media is a factor now. And so like being able to weigh those two things, that like we need to make sure that we're still internalizing those old school journalistic values that are really important, but we're also challenging some of these standards that have been standards for years, objectivity and how we cover racial issues and things like that. So it's this very difficult moment where we're trying to do both. But I think, I think that there's a lot of opportunities out there to make sure that voices are heard, and that people on your street deserve a voice just as much as the guy that's yelling in the community meeting every night. So make sure that everybody is heard.
Thank you. Ankur.
That's a good question. I don't really know the answer. Like I don't really have a good answer to that question, because I think I'm still also trying to figure that out myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, sorry, there's a caravan going by my house right now, so if that's loud. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think just like trying to figure out, I think, yeah, like journalism historically is not serving like working class communities of color, and like the way it operates needs to be like fundamentally like reshaped completely. Like I think like right now it's like very much like you have journalists not from the community come into a community, extract the story, commodify it, and have it be like consumed by like audiences outside of that community. Like that's generally like what happens most of the time. So I think like trying to figure out a way of like, so there's like three very separate groups of people. Like how do you like make it so that all those groups of people are the same, where like the journalists are coming from the community and writing about like their own community. And I think that's like a very different like shift and a very different model of like how journalism works. So I think like, yeah, just like experimenting with different stuff and like trying to like figure things like that out. I don't know, like we're just trying. I think we just need like a lot of people just trying new stuff and like experimenting and making mistakes, and like having people willing to like actually like fund like things that sound weird but like might work, because I think like how it's working right now just like isn't working, and we just need to like completely rethink everything.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're all trying to figure it out. You're absolutely right. Stephanie, we probably have time for one more question.
It's so tough because they're all so good. Okay. This last one, and I apologize to everybody who missed out on getting their questions answered, but in the interest of time, we encourage you to follow up with our panelists via Twitter. We have all their handles in the chat function. So if you didn't get your question answered tonight, please feel free to follow up. So last question is going to come from Amber Cologne. What tips do you have for recent graduates during these unprecedented times? With hiring freezes, rejection letters, and loads of competition in Chicago, what can make you stand out as a rookie? So I'm going to pose this to whoever jumps in first, 2 panelists, and go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. Oh, Mina, you unmuted first. Go ahead.
No, you go first.
I was just going to say, work your best to stand out. Anything that was working a year ago is not what's going to get you hired right now. I think we have great social media platforms like TikTok and, like Instagram Reels and all that stuff where you can showcase your ability on social media, recognizing that social media is your resume and you can really use that to help you land a job. And the other thing is also anything you're interested in, you can get a job in. I think we're learning now that creativity is at the forefront of everything that we're doing. I'm seeing people that I've been following on Instagram for years that make funny videos, have collaborations with prominent media companies. I saw a girl actually on TikTok who was just a meteorologist on TikTok, actually got a job offer at a local TV station as an actual meteorologist. Yeah, so I mean, just really being creative and just honing, on your ability specifically and just staying true to who you are, because that is what's going to allow you to stand out, because we know right now everyone is looking for jobs. So you just kind of have to think, what's going to make me stand out?
Mina.
She really said a lot of things I was going to say, but I think figuring out what you like to write about, figuring out what you like to report on, because that's the thing that you should do. And that's what's going to make you stand out. Like Angel said, is, once you figure out what you like to write about, and then you start writing about it and you have clips, then you become an expert in the thing that you're writing about, and then people are going to go to you. I mean, we have a guy that really likes writing about the cannabis industry and is really interested in it, and he's our go-to guy for cannabis stories now, and he just really liked writing about it and was good at it, and he became our go-to freelancer. So I think that's the advice that I would give, is just really honing in on what you like and then going from there. I think that that's a better route to go than saying I just want to be a general assignment reporter right now. And that's just because of the way the industry is I think I think employers want to find niche reporters who can cover a certain beat really well. So that would be my advice. Because you also don't want to be reporting and writing on something that you don't like too. You want to enjoy your career, right? So I think that's a big part of it too.
Thank you, Mina. Wow, this has been such an amazing discussion. I am blown away by the depth of the insights that we've received. We've covered some pretty heavy topics, from the post-George Floyd reckoning with race that this nation is undergoing, to the COVID-19 very traumatic, very depressing pandemic, to how do you navigate race in your own newsroom, and how do you navigate your values when your newsroom does not align with those values. And we talked, oh gosh, we've covered so much. We've covered going the entrepreneurial route, like Ankur, and starting your own news outlet. And if you bring it, they will come, right? If you build it, they will come. There's always a need, and it's just about someone finding a way to meet that need. And we've heard from Mina about just how you grow in a digital sphere. And we've heard from Nader about the challenges in legacy newsrooms, that are being pulled, sometimes kicking and dragging, into the 22nd century. in terms of so many of these issues that we're discussing. And we've heard from Angel about how to, build your career and learn how to fit whatever it is you're working on into the times that we live in. This is just amazing, amazing information for all of you who are entry-level journalists or recent college graduates, or those of you who are joining us, we know, from Northwestern's Medill, from DePaul University, from Columbia College, from North Central, from Boston, Emerson College. We thank you. We thank you all. We hope that you've gotten a lot of good information that you can use going forward. And most of all, we thank our amazing panelists. You guys are the bomb. You guys are awesome. I thank you so much. Thanks for giving us an hour and a half of your Tuesday night. We know there's a million other things that you could be doing. So we are humbled, we are grateful, we are honored, and we say good night.